Hi guys, my name is Julianne and I'll be covering Chapter 2 of Chemistry Comes Alive. First, we're going to start off with what is matter. Matter is anything that occupies space and has mass. States of matter includes solid, liquid, and gas. An example of those three is an ice cube, a water droplet, and the air or helium inside a balloon. All matter is composed of elements. Elements are substances that can't be broken down into simpler substances. So any element includes anything on the periodic table. This includes oxygen, carbon, gold, and iron. We'll be starting off with atoms and atomic structure. Atoms is the smallest matter and is the building blocks of ordinary matter. Atomic structure includes the protons, electrons, and neutrons. In the second part of this whiteboard, we see the atomic structure of the helium atom. The red part is the proton, which is positive. Neutron is the pink, and proton and neutron make the nucleus, and then the outside, the black dots, are electrons. So protons are positively charged, neutrons are neutral, so they have no charge, and electrons have a negative charge. So the electrons and energy level is electron shells that represent a different energy level inside an atom, are specific energies that electrons have when occupying specific orbitals. The octet rule is a general rule of thumb that applies to most atoms. Basically, the octet rule wants to have 8 valence electrons in each outermost electron shell. In this case, for sodium, it doesn't follow the octet rule because the octet rule is 2, 8, 8, and this one is following 2, 8, and then the outermost shell only has 1. So we'll be talking about the 3 different chemical bonds. There's an ionic bond, covalent bond, and a hydrogen bond. An ionic bond is a chemical bond between atoms by the transfer of 1 or more electrons from one atom to another. In my whiteboard I have the example of an ionic bond between sodium chloride. So chloride starts with no charges, then sodium gives an electron to chlorine, and then sodium loses an electron while chlorine gains an electron from sodium, and then the ions have opposite charges, so they stick together. The process in step 2, where the sodium gives electrons to chlorine, that is known as anions and cations. So in this case, an anion is a negative charge that the atom, which is the atom that gains electrons. So the anion would be chlorine, and the cation is a positive charge. In this case, it would be sodium, and is the atom that loses the electron. Next, we have a covalent bond. Covalent bond is electron sharing that produces molecules. The shared electrons occupy a single orbital common to both atoms and creates a covalent bond. In this one here, we have an example of 2 separate hydrogen atoms, and then they join together to join a hydrogen molecule. There's 2 types of covalent bonds. There's a nonpolar and a polar. Nonpolar is 2 atoms sharing a pair of electrons, and the polar is 2 atoms where the electrons forming the bond are unequally distributed. The third chemical bond is the hydrogen bond, which I just have a little example over here. And the hydrogen bond is a weak bond between 2 molecules, attracting a proton in one molecule and an electronegative atom in another. We're going to be talking about chemical reactions. Chemical reactions is the rearrangement of molecular or ionic structure of a substance. First, we'll be looking at a chemical equation, the reactants, the products, and what metabolism is. A chemical equation is a symbolic representation of a chemical reaction, which is this. So the reactants are always on the left and the products is always on the right. Reactants is the number and kinds of the interacting substances, and the products is the chemical composition of the result of the reactant. So in this example, we see glucose and oxygen form carbon dioxide and water. carbon dioxide in water is the product, and the glucose and the oxygen are the reactants that make that product. Metabolism is a sum of all chemical reactions in the body. Now we'll be talking about the types of chemical reactions. There are 3. First, we're going to be talking about synthesis anabolic reactions. Synthesis anabolic reactions is the basis of constructive activities in body cells, joining small molecules like amino acids into larger molecules. So we have this example right here. So taking small molecules into larger molecules, so it's kind of like A plus B, and together it forms the larger molecule, putting it together. Now we have decomposition, which is also known as catabolic reactions. The molecule is broken down into smaller molecules, so it's kind of a reverse synthesis reaction. So instead of smaller molecules creating bigger molecules, it's going to be bigger molecules decomposing down to the 2 or whatever molecules in the reactant side. So this one's like A and B, and then the product of A and B would just be A and then separate B, as it's shown here. The third type of chemical reaction is an exchange reaction, also known as displacement. It involves synthesis and decomposition, so bonds are both made and broken and produces different product molecules. So in this case, we can either get like AB plus C makes AC plus B, or AB plus CD makes AD plus CB. That is an exchange reaction known as displacement, where it involves both synthesis and decomposition, which synthesis is making bonds more and decomposition is breaking them down. Next, we'll be talking about the energy flow in reactions, and there's 2 of them. There's endergonic and exergonic. Exergonic reaction is a reaction that releases energy. It's catabolic, and so therefore it gives off energy. So in this graph, it shows that the reactants are giving off the energy to produce the products, while endergonic is energy absorbing, so it contains more potential energy in their chemical bonds than did the reactants. So it requires energy, it's anabolic. So as you can see here from the endergonic, the energy in the chemical bonds, there's more potential energy in the reactions than in the products. We'll be starting biochemistry, and biochemistry is the study of chemical composition and reactions of living matter. There is inorganic and organic compounds. Inorganic is all other chemicals in the body, which include water, salts, acids, and bases, which is inorganic. Inorganic is contains carbon and are made by living matter, living things. All organic compounds are covalently bonded molecules. Inorganic compounds is what we'll be focusing on right now, which includes water and its properties, salts and acids and bases. Water allows reactions to happen. It dissolves most, so it's known as the universal solvent. So water is known as for its polarity and its solvent properties. Since it's a universal solvent, it is able to dissolve other polar molecules and ionic compounds. Another characteristic of water is that it participates in chemical reactions. So for instance, since it's reactant in chemical reactions, when food is broken down, it is because there is a release of a water molecule. Water also has high heat capacity, which is why it boils really easily. It absorbs and releases large amounts of heat. Water is also a lubricant, so it helps things flow easily and helps protect our organs from physical trauma. Now we'll be talking about another inorganic compound, which is salts. Salts is an ionic compound containing cations other than hydrogen and anions other than hydroxide. Now we'll be talking about acids and bases. Acids and bases. Acids and bases are electrolytes. They ionize and dissociate in water and conduct an electrical current. An acid is a substance that releases hydrogen ions. They are known as proton donors. Concentration of proton determines the acidity of a solution. A base is known as a proton acceptor. They take up hydrogen ions. When HCl plus NaOH interact, NaCl plus H2O is formed. Reacting with other displacement reactions to form water and salt happens when acids and bases are mixed. This process is known as neutralization. The image shown is a pH scale. It measures acid-base concentration. pH of 7 is neutral. It is neither acidic or basic. An example of a solution that is neutral is pure water. Human blood also fits in this category since it's between 7.35 through 7.45. Hydrogen ions in bodily fluids is measured in pH units. The more hydrogen ions in the solution, the more acidic, the lower it'll go on the scale. To prevent a solution from becoming too acidic or too basic, also known as alkaline, this is when buffers come in. Buffers resist abrupt and large swings in the pH of body fluids by releasing hydrogen ions. For example, when acid is added to a buffered solution, the buffer binds the added hydrogen ions and removes them from the solution. Vice versa, when a base is added to a buffered solution, the buffer releases hydrogen ions into the solution. Both effects minimize the pH changes that otherwise would occur in the solution if the buffer were not present. Now we'll be talking about organic compounds. Organic compounds is made by dehydration synthesis and is broken down by hydrolysis. Dehydration synthesis is joining two molecules or compounds together following the removal of water, which is condensation reaction. Hydrolysis is the opposite reaction in which molecules are degraded, so a water molecule is added to each bond that is broken. There are major classes of organic compounds which include carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Carbohydrates are a group of molecules that include sugars and starches. They are for cellular fuel. Types of carbohydrates are monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides are simple sugars, disaccharides are double sugars, so this is when two monosaccharides are joined in dehydration synthesis. Polysaccharides are polymers of simple sugars linked by dehydration synthesis as well. Polysaccharides include starch and glycogen. Lipids store energy, and the most common are triglycerides and phospholipids. Triglycerides are neutral fats, which includes unsaturated fat and saturated fat. It is the body's most efficient form of stored energy. Phospholipids are modified triglycerides having two fatty acid chains that make cell membranes. They are hydrophilic and hydrophobic. Hydrophilic means they love interacting with water, so they interact with polar charged particles, and hydrophobic means they hate water. Proteins are long chains of amino acids joined together by dehydration synthesis to create peptide bonds. It is made of amino acids, so it's which are building blocks of proteins, and the peptide bonds are a reaction occurring between amino acids by dehydration synthesis. There are four structural levels of organization of a protein shape, which is shown here. It is primary structure, secondary structure, tertiary structure, and quaternary structure. Let's see if I can get this to focus. This is a primary structure, secondary structure, tertiary structure, and quaternary structure. Primary structure is just a strand of amino acids. Secondary structure is creating a twist and bend, most known as an alpha helix, which resembles a slinky toy. Tertiary structure is one chain of amino acids, and quaternary structure is two or more amino acid chains. There are also fibrous proteins and globular proteins. but we are going to focus more on what our catalyst is, which are enzymes. Catalysts are globular proteins that regulate and accelerate the rate of biochemical reactions. The characteristic of enzymes is that it's a biological catalyst, so it speeds up reactions, and there are different types, but we're going to focus on what the enzymes do. They can molecular chaperones, transport, regulate pH, regulate metabolism, defense, and all of it is to rearrange the bonds of the reactants to become the product. Alright, to wrap up Chapter 2, Chemistry Comes Alive, we're going to end this with talking about RNA and DNA. First, we're going to talk about nucleic acids. Nucleic acids is the largest molecule in the bodies, which include the DNA and the RNA. It is composed of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and phosphates. And the structure of these nucleic acids are long strands of nucleotides. DNA has a double helix, so it has 2 nucleotides, while RNA only has 1 strands of nucleotides. RNA stands for ribonucleic acids, and it is known as the molecular slave of the DNA. And it's because it carries out the orders for protein synthesis issued by DNA. RNA is located outside the nucleus, and it includes like messenger, ribosomal, and transfer RNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, which is a genetic material, which is genes, and it reproduces itself before cell divides and provides the basic instructions for building every protein in the body. And for all of this to happen, we need ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, which is energy transferring molecule in cells and provides energy. Alright guys, thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I hope you learned a lot about Chapter 2 with my demonstrations, and I hope you have a good day. Bye!